In Israel, many people feared that another Holocaust was imminent. An atmosphere of gloom prevailed. Some expected tens of thousands to die. Mass burial sites were hastily prepared in public parks like Gan Meir, in the heart of Tel Aviv. Prime Minister Eshkol had given a speech on Israeli radio on May 28, 1967, that only made things worse. Because the text had been changed at the last moment, Eshkol stuttered over key phrases. The Israeli public understood it as a lack of resolve on his part, aggravating existing fears. However, the heads of the Israeli army and intelligence community were sure of their own capabilities and pressured Eshkol to let them strike first. Mossad chief Amit flew to Washington, where he met with the Defense Secretary Robert McNamara. Amit understood from McNamara's response that he had obtained what he later described as a flashing green light for Israel to launch a preemptive attack. The Six-Day War broke out at 7:45 on the morning of June 5th in 1967, with the entire Israeli Air Force bombing and strafing dozens of enemy airfields. Thanks to detailed and precise intelligence gathered by Mossad and Amman over long years of preparing for war, Israel's Air Force was able to destroy, within hours, nearly every combat plane that Egypt, Syria, and Jordan owned. By the time the war ended on June 10th, Israel was occupying territories that increased its size by more than 300%. Its conquests included the Sinai Peninsula, as well as the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and Gaza. It now oversaw more than 1 million Palestinian inhabitants in these territories as well. Many as 9, that's not a year, as many, that is a year. It now oversaw more than 1 million Palestinian inhabitants in those territories as well, many of them 1948 refugees, who now were occupied by the same forces that had dispossessed them of their land 20 years before. In less than a week, the face of the Middle East had been completely transformed. The war proved that the Israeli intelligence community and its military enjoyed unchallenged superiority over its rivals in the Arab states. Yet some Israelis realized that the mighty victory was not just a reason to rejoice. It was also an opportunity to forge a lasting truce. Amman research chief Gazit composed a special top-secret paper distributed to the leaders of the government and the military that included a warning that we should not look like braggarts mocking a defeated enemy, debasing him and his leaders. The memo called for immediate negotiations with the Arab states and the use of the conquered territories in a barter deal, an Israeli withdrawal, and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state in exchange for an overall, absolute, and final peace treaty. In the Shin Bet, too, there were many who believed that this was an historic opportunity to end the national conflict between Jews and Arabs. Even Israel's #1 spy, Meir Admit, grasped the potential for peace, but his advice fell on deaf ears. The sharp transition undergone by the Israeli public and its parliamentarians and cabinet ministers, from citizens and leaders of a country on the brink of destruction to those of a seemingly invincible empire, made everyone blind to the truth that even victory in the occupation of enemy territory could entail grave dangers. Amit was one of the few who comprehended the profound and dangerous new trend in the national psychology. What's happening now is a disappointment, a painful disappointment, he wrote in his diary 2 weeks after the war. I am apprehensive and worried and fearful at this waste of a victory. When I see how matters are being conducted, my hands go limp, and I get a terrible feeling. While Amit saw Israel's victory as an opportunity for peace, Yasser Arafat and Abu Jihad saw the Arab nations' overwhelming defeat as a catastrophe to be exploited. They realized that the disgraceful failure of the Arab states' leaders would make room in public opinion for new leaders, who would be perceived as young, brave, and uncorrupted. Abu Jihad also grasped that it would now be easier to wage guerrilla warfare against Israel. On June 20th, just then, 10 days after the war ended, Arafat and Abu Jihad announced from Beirut that Fatah would continue its struggle. Only now from within territories Israel had just conquered. True to his word, Abu Jihad initiated a damaging wave of terror attacks in Gaza and the West Bank. 13 attacks took place during September 1967, 10 in October, 18 in November, and 20 in December. The targets were mostly civilian: factories, houses, cinemas, and the like. In the wake of those attacks, no one in Israeli intelligence dared advocate negotiations with Fatah. Although Abu Jihad was waging the war, it was clear to the Israelis that Fatah's leader was Yasser Arafat. He was the only one who laid down the diplomatic and ideological lines and who gradually managed to unite all of the various Palestinian factions under his authority. He had also begun to mediate relationships with the leaders of the Arab states, who had originally seen Fatah as a dangerous threat. In 1964, the Arab states founded the Palestinian Organization. In 1964, the Arab states founded the Palestine Liberation Organization, and placed a puppet of theirs, Ahmad Shukri, at its head. But in the wake of the organization's dismal performance in the Six-Day War, and with Arafat's rising prominence, Fatah gradually began taking control of the PLO, until Arafat was finally elected its chairman. Abu Jihad became the coordinator of its military activities, in effect, the second in command. Arafat, who took to wearing a kafiyeh headdress draped to look like a map of Palestine, had become the symbol of the Palestinian struggle. Israel must strike at the heart of terror organizations, their HQs, their headquarters. Yehuda Arbel, the Shin Bet commander in Jerusalem and the West Bank, wrote in his diary, "The elimination of Abu Ammar, Arafat, is a precondition to finding the solution to the Palestinian problem." Arbel pressed the committee of three to take steps to achieve this goal. For his part, he drew up and distributed a wanted poster, the first of many, which included the following description: short, 155 to 160 centimeters, dark-skinned, build, chubby, bald spot in the middle of his head, hair on temples, gray, mustache, shaven, demeanor, restive, eyes, constantly darting back and forth. Israeli forces tried to kill Arafat a few times during and immediately after the Six-Day War. In the days following Israel's victory, a Shin Bet informer identified his hideout in the old city of Jerusalem, not far from Jaffa Gate. A contingent of soldiers was sent to get Arafat, dead or alive, but he managed to flee just a few minutes before they arrived. 2 days later, soldiers acting on another tip from a 504 agent raided an apartment in Beit Hanina, a village just east of Jerusalem, but found only a pita full of salad and a tahini, with a few bites gone. A day later, Arafat managed to cross over one of the Jordan River bridges, dressed as a woman, in a cab belonging to one of his supporters. In the meantime, PLO terror attacks against Israel became more frequent and more deadly. Between the end of the war and March 1968, 65 soldiers and 50 civilians were killed, and 249 soldiers and 295 civilians were wounded. The attacks launched by Fatah from its headquarters in Karame, in southern Jordan Valley, led to frequent clashes between IDF and the Jordanian army, and the long border between the two countries seethed with tension, making normal life on the Israeli side impossible. The IDF brass urged Eshkol to approve a massive military operation, but he was hesitant. The Mossad was frustrated. The humiliation caused by the terror attacks produced a feeling of helplessness, recalled Caesarea chief Savi Aharoni. "I told the guys, Think outside the box. Think of an idea of how to kill Arafat. The plan they came up with in January 1968 had called for shipping a large car from Europe to Beirut, where it would be packed with explosive, then driven to Damascus by a Caesarea man operating under the cover of a businessman. It would be parked outside Arafat's residence and detonated remotely at the right time. Amit went to Eshkol to seek approval, but was met with a blunt refusal on the grounds that the attack would invite and justify retaliatory attempts on the lives of Israeli political leaders. Eshkol saw Arafat as a terrorist, but one who had attained the status of a political leader, and this was perhaps the best proof of all of the PLO chairman's success. But the Palestinian terror continued unabated. On March 18th, the school bus hit a landmine. 2 adult escorts were killed and 10 children wounded. Now, the reluctant Eshkol gave in to the pressure. He agreed that killing Arafat would be the primary aim of the operation against the Palestinian forces in and around Karame. On March 21st, 1968, a unit from Sayeret Matkal, the elite IDF commando force, was flown by helicopter to a staging point in the desert near the Fatah base in Karme. The commando's orders were simpler and clear: attack in daylight, seize control, isolate and kill the terrorists. At a cabinet meeting the night before, the chief of the General Staff, Lieutenant General Chaim Bar-Lev, had promised a clean operation, by which he meant no or almost no Israeli casualties. But things went very wrong in the battle. But things went very wrong, and the battle dragged on much longer than had planned. The Jordan River is high at that time of year. The vegetation along its banks is thick, and the terrain difficult to negotiate, which held up the mechanized forces that were supposed to support the commandos. Furthermore, due to faulty coordination, the Air Force dropped leaflets warning the civilian population to evacuate at a preset time. The element of surprise was lost, and the Fatah forces had ample time to prepare for the assault. They fought back fiercely.